The Peace of Westphalia of 1648 ended a religious fanatic era that claimed nearly 8 million lives, when people realized that merely the cryptic content of the Bible, or slight differences in ideas or beliefs, could trigger violent conflicts and mutual massacres. Just how foolish it was. People finally understood that if tolerance can make life better, then why wouldn't we continue down that path? But clearly, that path was much more rugged and difficult than imagined. In the face of interest, our unchangeable nature would eventually be exposed. In the mid-18th century, a historical event on the North American continent once again confirmed that, no matter how slogans change over time, as long as interests are at stake, people will always take up arms and fight. It was a major event that permanently reshaped North American history. The story revolves around three main powers, namely France, Britain, and the indigenous power of North America, the Iroquois Confederacy. In order to expand the lucrative fur trade, French traders ventured deep into the remote wilderness of North America. Fervent French Jesuit missionaries stepped into the vast interior of North America in search of potential converts. In short, thanks to the efforts of the French, by the mid-18th century, the ever-expanding territory of New France had reached about 8 million square kilometers. To consolidate this vast overseas colony, the French also established a series of scattered communities and forts, mission districts and trading posts, Quebec, Montreal, Sault Ste. Marie, and cities like Detroit, all of which stand as iconic cities established by the French in North America. Their prosperity rivaled that of the British colonial cities along the Atlantic coast. Although New France's territory seemed vast, its population disadvantage severely limited its further development. By the mid-18th century, New France had a population of only about 70,000, while the British North American colonies had 1 million inhabitants. As for the Native Americans across North America, their numbers exceeded at least 4 million. This vast gap in scale made it crucial for the French, both for the long-term stable development of their North American colonies, and for competing with other European colonizers, to maintain good relations with the locals, who could either be trading partners or military allies. To befriend the Native Americans, the French proactively adapted to their customs. French fur trappers even married Native American women and embraced the traditions of local clans, and French Jesuit missionaries also managed to coexist peacefully with the locals, even converting a significant number of Native Americans to Catholicism. In contrast, the relationship between the British and the Native Americans was not as harmonious. The French offered the Native Americans tolerance, while the British imposed their own social norms on them. This different approach also led to the French colonizers gaining more support from Native Americans in the struggle for control of North America. Among the indigenous groups allied with the French, the Iroquois Confederacy stood out as particularly unique. The Iroquois Confederacy was composed of 5 major tribes. Unlike other Native American tribes, the Iroquois did not get too close to any colonial power unless absolutely necessary. They skillfully navigated between various forces, thus maintaining their independence, allowing the Iroquois Confederacy to avoid conflicts among colonial armies, and creating favorable conditions for their stable development in the Great Lakes region. However, the Iroquois did not always choose the right path. In the contest between the British and French colonies in America, and as part of their wider European power struggle, the King George War from 1744 to 1748 was clearly influenced by a series of European conflicts. This was the war that erupted as an offshoot of the European War of the Austrian Succession. It was also the third war waged by British and French colonists in North America. This war, although eventually ended by the Treaty of Paris, did not eliminate the animosity between the two sides. Moreover, amid the already tense relations between Britain and France, the Iroquois Confederacy made a grave mistake by deciding to allow British merchants to access inland trade through the Ohio trade route. Worried about British expansion, France began constructing forts in the Ohio Valley in 1749. In preparation for potential military conflicts, military brinkmanship often escalates gradually. Seeing this move, the British regarded it as a threat, and soon started building forts themselves, leading to a military standoff with France. Over the next 5 years, relations between the British and French grew even tenser. In the summer of 1754, under orders from the Virginian governor, a militia led by George Washington was deployed to stop the French expansion in the Ohio Valley. This led to military clashes with the French. This conflict marked the beginning of the 19-year French and Indian War. Thus, the French and Indian War erupted. Shortly after the outbreak of the war, a larger-scale 7 Years' War broke out on the European continent. Britain and France found themselves on opposing sides in the 7 Years' War. Therefore, the French and Indian War is usually considered part of the 7 Years' War. The 9-year French and Indian War in America can be roughly divided into three phases. The first phase occurred from 1754 to 1756. This phase was mainly characterized by local conflicts in North America. British colonists relied on their own strength to confront the enemy. Since New France's population was far smaller than that of the British colonies, France was more dependent on the support of local Native Americans. With the exception of the Iroquois Confederacy, France secured nearly the support of all Native American tribes. During the first phase, British colonists virtually failed to establish effective defenses. Under French pressure, most of the colonists retreated east of the Allegheny Mountains. When Britain and France officially went to war in Europe in 1756, the conflict in North America entered its second phase. This phase was defined by a series of tough new policies implemented by the British government to reverse the declining situation in North America. Britain expanded recruitment among the colonists to bolster its forces, and, to address supply shortages, British officers began requisitioning supplies from colonists' homes, and forced them to provide housing for British troops. Most of these actions came without any compensation, resulting in not only failing to reverse the war's momentum, but also, due to their overbearing behavior, promptly meeting fierce resistance from the colonists. In 1757, riots erupted in New York against the British government. People protested the British government, even inciting disturbances. Later, Britain realized that these coercive wartime measures were not helping to change the war's course, and in 1758 began to ease many of the harsh policies imposed on the colonists. Thus, the North American War entered its final phase. During this phase, the British began compensating for requisition supplies, and conscription powers were returned to the colonial assemblies. This move led to a surge in enlistments among the colonists. In addition, to increase their chances of victory, the British government dispatched a large number of reinforcements to North America. With the concerted efforts of various forces, the tide of the war began to turn in Britain's favor. Under the blockade imposed by the formidable British Navy, the already supply-starved French forces found themselves in a dire situation. In 1759, Quebec in Canada was captured, and a year later, the French formally surrendered in Montreal. Seeing that the North American War was decided, King Louis XV of France took action to prevent further British expansion in North America, aiming both to halt their advance and to strike at Spain. In order to secure more support during the 7 Years' War, in 1762, France secretly signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau with Spain, voluntarily ceding Louisiana and New Orleans the latter. The Treaty of Fontainebleau was only made public after the end of the 7 Years' War. In 1763, the 7 Years' War, mainly fought in Europe, was also nearing its end. The warring countries signed the Treaty of Paris. As the biggest winner of the 7 Years' War, Britain not only gained most of New France's territory, but also acquired Florida from Spain. Thanks to this war, Britain established its dominance in North America. France. The war with Native Americans had a profound impact on North American history. First, as the defeated party, France undoubtedly lost its economic interests and political influence in North America. Secondly, France's defeat was equally disastrous for the Native Americans. These Native Americans, who had allied with France, were sidelined by the British after the war. Their control over the Ohio Valley was gradually taken by the British. Of course, this also led to further deterioration in British-Native American relations, eventually sparking later Native American uprisings. As for the Iroquois, who tried to play both sides, their situation was only slightly better than other Native Americans. After the war, the brief friendship between the British and the Iroquois quickly broke down, and thereafter, they, like other Native Americans, engaged in a long and painful territorial struggle with the British. After acquiring vast territories from France, the rapidly expanding British American colonies seemed prosperous, but in reality, great risks lurked behind the prosperity. The large-scale and prolonged war nearly doubled Britain's national debt. To tackle the heavy debt crisis, relations between Britain and the colonies quickly worsened. In the British view, North American colonists' performance during the war was disappointing, and this war, mainly fought to protect colonists' interests, brought very limited actual gains to Britain. What angered the British even more was some selfish colonial merchants profited by selling supplies to France during the war. In short, due to the above reasons, many British leaders after the war decided that because the North American colonies needed to be reorganized, it was necessary to strengthen control over North America, because the North American colonies had to prove their value to the empire. But for these colonists in North America, the impact of the war was quite different. For the first time, the colonists united with shared hatred for the enemy. This shared belief gradually evolved into a force capable of opposing any power that threatened colonial order. Even their mother country was no exception. They briefly clashed with Britain over conscription policy, but through the colonists' efforts, they regained their rights in the colonial assemblies. In short, the experience of the war gave the colonists the idea that no one has the right to force them to do anything. They have the right to choose their own path. This fundamentally different belief obviously strongly conflicted with the new policies the British government was about to impose on the colonies. On the North American continent, a new struggle quietly began.